Hello, I'm Victoria Ballou-Schaefer, and thank you so much for joining us. We have a very special treat for you today. Joni Patry is going to give us her 2014 Vedic astrology predictions for specific countries. And it's so fascinating, I can't wait to jump in. But first, welcome, Joni.
Thank you.
And first of all, I must congratulate you on a couple of very accurate predictions that you made last October about the country of Turkey, specifically about an earthquake happening, which unfortunately in today's news, an earthquake did happen in Turkey just off of the coast, but fortunately it was just 5.8 on the Richter scale and did not cause any major devastation. That's the good news.
Right.
You were very accurate about that, as well as there being social unrest in that country, something that you predicted last October. And indeed, Prime Minister Erdogan has been strongly encouraged to step down from his position. You nailed all of these predictions last October before there was any clue that this was coming forward. So congratulations on some very accurate predictions. And
thank you.
Shall we begin with Turkey, since we've already had an introduction there?
Yes, and I have to say I love Turkey because I go to Turkey twice a year. The people there are so kind and loving, and they love astrology and spirituality, so I'm asked to go teach there twice a year. And in my class last October, we had analyzed the chart for Turkey. And in that chart, very specific things were happening, and I predicted that in January and December particularly, the last week of December and throughout January is a very critical time for Turkey, based on the fact that if you look at the birth chart for Turkey, Turkey has an ascendant in Gemini at 14 degrees, and Mars is 14 degrees in their fourth house in Virgo. And transiting Mars, what we're talking about is the planets in a birth chart, where they are in a birth chart, and then we look at where the planets are moving constantly. And as the transiting planets are right now, transiting Mars is conjunct the natal Mars in their chart in the fourth house, which deals with land, property, real estate, and therefore it's disrupting their land, literally and figuratively. So the social unrest and also the land with earthquakes. But the planet that rules earthquakes is Uranus, and it is exactly opposed Mars at this time in the sky. So they're both at 14 degrees, Pisces and Virgo, and the natal Mars in that chart is at 14 degrees of Virgo. So it's setting things off. Now, right now, it's due to happen, and then I'm looking at some major events that are happening in the springtime, particularly when Mars stops and goes retrograde. It's going to station around March 1st at about 3 degrees of Libra. And at that point in the Turkish chart, they have, it's Saturn and Mercury are conjunct in this chart. And during that time, Mars is going to situate on those two planets, which at that time means there's going to be a big shift in change in that country's government, Saturn ruling government. And also, if you will look at their chart, they have the sun there in Libra as well. So it means there's going to be change in government and the leadership will change. And as we were talking about, the government is under a lot of social unrest, and there's a lot of chaos, and there's a lot of things, accusations within this government that there's corruption going on, and therefore the people are protesting, and there's just a big revolution, or should I say, rebellion in the streets. And this will continue, and this will happen even more throughout the spring. And I also believe that it's going to be in May when Mars will station to go direct. That's going to be around May 19th, and it will station at the exact degree it is today, around 14 degrees of Virgo. So this country I wanted to talk about first because it has the most going on in their national birth chart. And you're going to see a lot happening, and Turkey will be in the news on and off this entire year, but particularly you're going to see in the springtime and in May when things are really going to rev up in the world news concerning Turkey. And one more thing I wanted to add, as I'm speaking and I'm talking about these planets, since I am doing Vedic astrology, it is different than Western astrology. So you're going to find that the placements of where the planets are backwards, almost a full sign, not quite, because I use the sidereal system of calculation used in Vedic astrology. In Western astrology, it's the tropical system. And the sidereal system is actually where the planets truly are in the sky. If you were to ask an astronomer, where is Mars in accordance to the constellation and the stars? It's exactly where it is according to the sidereal system. Sidereal actually means star, so it's representing that we are talking about the placements of the stars in the constellations. So this is the sidereal system used in Vedic astrology. And while we're on the topic of Turkey, I want to be talking about the entire Middle East, because the whole Middle East is going to be what is the most turbulent and in the news throughout this time, this whole year of 2014, but particularly as Mars is slowing down to go retrograde. Mars is the most powerful planet, and Mars, of course, is the planet of war, chaos, disruption. It's energy, so it's a big trigger. And as it comes to this point in Virgo, it is opposing planet Uranus, which is the planet of sudden, unexpected occurrences. And at the same time, Mars is squaring where Pluto is, which is approximately around 15 to 17 degrees of Sagittarius. And opposed Pluto is Jupiter, right there in the same sector, opposed Pluto around 20 degrees of Gemini. So we've got this grand cross. It's like all these planets are crossing. So anytime a country or a person has planets that are within this grand cross, you can expect big events to be occurring. And most all of the countries that are in the news right now in the Middle East have these planetary alignments. And so another thing is, I wanted to talk about Syria, because Syria is constantly in the news with all the chemical weapons, and there's been terrible, terrible things happening in Syria, and that will continue. As a matter of fact, Syria will stay in the news. As in, I look at Syria's chart, they also have a Gemini ascendant, just like Turkey. And in this Gemini ascendant, we have 22 degrees on the ascendant. And that is right there where Jupiter will be. And I also noticed that in Syria, the Mercury is 20 degrees of Virgo. So in about a week from today, and we're at the very end of the year of 2013 in December, you're going to find that a lot is going to be uncovered in Syria. And there's going to be a lot of social unrest. And anything involving transportation will be dangerous in Syria. Of course, I don't suggest you travel to Syria right now, but car bombings, things of that nature will be more heavily in a big uproar coming. So I also noticed that Syria, around February and March, that transiting Mars is going to come and oppose their natal Mars. This is a really big deal. And also, in the summer months, K2 is going to come and conjunct their natal Mars. Their natal Mars is 0 degrees of Aries, and Mars will be 0 degrees of Libra, exactly opposing this, while Rahu and K2, which is the north and the south node of the moon, are going to come right in alignment to where Mars stations. So we're going to have Rahu and Mars conjoin in Libra when Mars stations to go retrograde. That combination of Mars-Rahu is very dangerous, and it represents another upheaval of war. And of course, in the sign of Libra, and Saturn's there on top of it, 3 first-rate malefics, Saturn, Rahu, and Mars, together in Libra, are going to bring out the worst in any kind of government that is not being run properly, because Libra is the sign of balance. Libra is the sign of government. Libra is the sign that creates peace, but it means there is social unrest and there is not peace in these countries. So for Syria, the fact that their Mars is going to be tied up with that Mars, Saturn, Rahu, Ketu, means that there's more to come from Syria. A lot more attacks, social unrest, and let's see, Mars in this case, in their chart, rules the 6th house, which means attacks, which means enemies, which means problems there, and can even mean disease. So I wouldn't even be surprised if they bring back some of the chemical weapons and they're not through with using those. So the next country to talk about is Iran. And of course, Iran's been in the news because now they have been given the ability to use the nuclear energy. So in this case, Iran has their sun at 17 degrees of Pisces, right exactly where Uranus is going to be. Actually, in, let's see, around April 22nd to the 23rd, we have an aspect where you're going to find that Mars and Mars is going to be in Virgo. It's going to back up into Virgo. And at that point, it's going to oppose their sun at 17 degrees of Pisces. So what's going to happen on that day is there's going to be an exact grand cross. So it's going to be precisely at 19 degrees. So you're at 19 degrees, you're going to have Jupiter, you're going to have Mars, you're going to have Pluto and Uranus. And any chart that has within a 3-degree range a planet within that 19-degree range will be activated in a big way. And it just so happens that Iran has the sun at 17 degrees, Uranus will be right on it. So this is an explosive, unexpected event. And this is due to happen in late April, okay? So looking at that, it's also, I pulled up Afghanistan. Afghanistan is also tied into this, where they have Jupiter and Mercury. Jupiter is 18 degrees of Gemini and Mercury is 16 degrees of Sagittarius in their chart. They have Jupiter, Mercury opposed, tied into this grand cross where Jupiter will be transiting and Pluto will be conjuncting their Mercury. So this is a breakdown of their government. And this, of course, will have some major repercussions with attacks and wars and more sort of like car bombings and things of that nature that will continue. But another thing I wanted to point out that I mentioned in the previous video on world events is the fact that Jupiter will be in a nakshatra called Ardra. And that's another beautiful thing about the Indian system called Vedic astrology, that we use the 27 nakshatras. And each of these nakshatras are rich with meaning. What it is like you take the entire zodiac and you divide the zodiac of 12 signs, each 30 degrees, into smaller portions of 13-degree, 20-minute portions. So when you take the entire zodiac and you divide it up into the 27 nakshatras, you're going to find that these portions of the zodiac have deep meaning. And the one that I discussed in great detail last time was called Ardra. And Ardra, this portion of the zodiac, which is in Gemini, is probably the most dangerous. And I said that it has the effect of giving a tragic event. And the last time that Jupiter was in Ardra was September 11th, 2001. So in 2001, Jupiter was in this nakshatra. And it will be, in Ardra again. And the timeline that Jupiter will be in Ardra will be January 16th through April 24th. And so during that time, that's the window that I foresee something that will be pretty tragic that will come to the world, that I believe will wake people up. This will be the Great Awakening, because when people don't change unless they have to. So this will force people to change, and it will force people to come together in a good way. But sometimes it takes tragic events to do this. So in Afghanistan, they're tied into this, this aspect as well. And their natal Jupiter is in the nakshatra of Ardra. Iraq is probably one of the most dangerous ones, looking at the birth chart, because the birth chart in Iraq, they have Mars and Ketu in the sign of Aries. Mars is 2 degrees, Ketu is 4 degrees. And so when Mars, as it stops, right before it goes retrograde, it's going to be in the sign of Libra, directly opposed their natal Mars, Ketu, in Aries. This is the breakout of war. This is serious. Something very dangerous. And in this country, it happens to occur in their 10th house. The 10th house in astrology is about the government. It's about government rule and leaders. And this is telling me that there is great danger and there is great war, and that the leaders are going to be very angry, very warlike, and they will be definitely a part of some massive changes, and some war will break out seriously in Iraq. And of course that puts their natal Rahu, opposed natal Ketu, in Libra, exactly where transiting Mars will station, at 3 degrees of Libra, and their Rahu is 4 degrees of Libra. Egypt. Egypt was in the news last summer. I actually wrote a very deep, compelling article on Egypt, and I had predicted prior to the major bloodshed, the event in the day, that this would break out and there would be a lot of death, which there was. Egypt is still going to be in the news and still has a lot of trouble and a long road ahead of them. But it's not as bad as previously last summer. So I predict for Egypt that late January, when transiting Mars will conjunct their Saturn, there will be another breakout. You see, all of these countries are trying to take back their freedom. The people are trying to overcome the dictatorships and take back democracy. So these countries are really, even though we have to fight for freedom, and that's what's happening all over the world, and particularly the Middle East are the countries that are being really overwhelmed with this planetary energy that is so extreme for 2014. Libya. Libya is another country that has been in the news, and Libya does have a critical degree mark in their chart that will, around the time of, around the time of that perfect grand cross, that's going to be about 19 degrees, which I said would be late April. That's going to entail Saturn and Mars in the country of Libya. Their natal Saturn and Mars is in Virgo. And that will be exactly where this grand cross, where Mars, transiting Mars, will conjunct their Mars and activate their Mars and their Saturn. And in the chart of Libya, their ascendant is Aquarius. So the Saturn-Mars for their chart is in the 8th house. Now the 8th house is the house of endings, particularly big changes. And part of that can revolve around death. So this will be a critical time for loss and death in the country of Libya. Israel. Israel was definitely in the news around this time last year. And Israel has their Ketu in Libra. They have their Rahu in Aries, which will be activated, of course, by this Mars when it moves up into the Libra sector before it goes back into Virgo. So there's going to be things that come to a head for Israel around March, and then it will subside in May. But then come the summer months, it's going to take over again, and there's going to be more turmoil in Israel. I do think there's going to be some serious things happening in war in the Middle East, but Israel is not as bad as it was. So Israel may get a little bit of a break, but I do see that after the first part of the year, things will get worse for Israel, whereas the first part of the year, all the other countries that I previously spoke of are going to be in more turmoil. So this will take place particularly around June and July and August, that Israel will have their problems to deal with. And so those are the major countries that I wanted to cover, looking at in terms of what's happening in the Middle East. So my prediction for the Middle East is I think Turkey and Syria will be the main, the center of where all of the social unrest is really coming about. And remember, whenever Uranus and Mars are aspecting one another, this is literally explosive events, which can mean earthquakes. So I'm predicting earthquakes, particularly in the spring, between now and I'd say through the end of April or May, no, through May. So January through May, we can expect earthquakes around the Mediterranean area of Turkey and around Syria and in the Middle East particularly, but the center will be around Syria and Turkey, and the other countries will have major upheaval, but it's all in the alignment to take back their freedom. The people want a democracy instead of dictatorship. So that's what I see happening in the Middle East.
Thank you so much for clearing that up about the difference between Vedic astrology and Western astrology. I know that a lot of people get confused about the difference between the two. Western tends to be more prevalent, yet Vedic is where Western astrology came from, and Vedic is so much more precise than Western astrology. So it's a bit confusing, and I really appreciate you being specific and at the same time very clear and simple about how we use Vedic astrology, how it's so much more predictive and accurate. Next, I would love for you to give us some insight about Russia, because Russia has such a big role to play in 2014 on the global stage because it's hosting the 2014 Summer Olympics. There's been a lot of controversy around their social policies dealing with homosexuality, and there is not only controversy, but there is a lot of people considering not even attending the Olympics in Russia because of this. And they've experienced their own social unrest with suicide bombers lately that are unrelated to the Olympics, but there seems to be so much political unrest there as well. So can you give us some insight into what's coming up in 2014 for Russia?
Of course. And always looking at the chart, you're going to find that everything's being triggered when events occur. And as I was going through the Middle East and looking at the degree points that were prevalent, that were being activated to cause such events, I find that once again, Mars is very important in what's happening in Russia today, which I think it was last night, there was the bombing with the train. And of course, looking at their birth chart, they have Mars at 14 degrees of Pisces, which is exactly where Uranus is. And Uranus is the planet of sudden events, rebellion, but it's also just things that we're not expecting. And for it to be conjuncting exactly natal Mars, this is dealing with some kind of explosive event. So I find that they're in Pisces, and I know before I was talking about the nakshatras, and I was talking about Ardra, but a nakshatra I want to mention now that's prevalent in this chart is where their natal Mars is, and their natal Mars is in the nakshatra Uttara Bhadrapada. It's 14 degrees of Pisces, and Uttara Bhadrapada is within the middle part of the sign Pisces. The symbol for Uttara Bhadrapada is a funeral cot. It's the back portion of a funeral cot. The front portion of the funeral cot is Purva Bhadrapada. So when we have these nakshatras that are Purva and Uttara, one means former or the front of, and one means latter or the end of. But Uttara Bhadrapada is one of the nakshatras that specifically is involved in death, and sometimes it's massive death along the lines of world events. So Uttara Bhadrapada, the back part of the funeral cot, represents events that involve death and dying. So the fact that Uranus conjuncted Mars this very day, of course there's an event that's occurring. And when I noticed that, that Mars, that transiting Mars, which is opposing this today, so again we've got the transiting Mars, transiting Uranus, opposing one another, and exactly their natal Mars is involved in this configuration. It's a trigger. But transiting Mars is in the 3rd house, which deals with transportation, and the 9th house deals with transportation as well. So we've got this opposition activating in the alignment of transportation. Now, would I have known it was a train or an airplane? Probably not. But we know this specifics that something is occurring concerning transportation in the chart concerning Russia. Also, when I look at Russia, they've got planets involved in this Grand Cross as well, because their natal Uranus is at 14 degrees of Sagittarius, and their natal Jupiter is at 21 degrees of Gemini. Remember, I keep saying that we've got Jupiter, Mars, Pluto, and Uranus all in these mutable signs forming this Grand Cross. This is transiting planets in the sky, but Russia's chart has natal planets exactly in this alignment, which their natal Jupiter's at 21 degrees Gemini, their Uranus is at 14 degrees of Sagittarius, and their Mars is at 14 degrees of Pisces. So you see it's being triggered now, and then later on, when their Jupiter is triggered at 21 degrees, once this Grand Cross, it will come into a perfect Grand Cross again through the backwards and forward motions of the planets. This will be around the end of April. So you can expect more events, more of these type of suicide bombings, more chaos, more warlike situations come about. And I'm sure this is the place that this is happening based on the fact that they do have the Olympics coming. And terrorists find this to be the spot where they want to attack. So looking at this is like a really serious time coming up for Russia. Also, I noticed that they have Venus in Aries, which will be triggered in the early spring, March, around February and March, where Saturn is opposing currently right now their Venus. And these planets their Venus will be involved between now and through the summer. And Venus in their chart is in their 10th house, dealing with their government and their ruling. And so their leaders, I feel, are not making the right judgments concerning what's to come with the big attention that's being focused on the Olympics, and as well as with their beliefs concerning homosexuality. This is going to really create a lot of chaos in their country with this backwards way of thinking. So you're going to find that there's going to be some big transformational issues that arise and big change and disruption in Russia.
So next, Joni, let's talk about one of the always huge world players, China. What's coming up in 2014 for them?
Wow, a lot. Looking at China, their sun is, of course, involved in this Grand Cross. It's at 14 degrees of Virgo. And right now, Mars, transiting Mars, is on their sun. So they're going to be in the news. There's going to be angry disputes. They're going to be, I noticed that their sun in their chart, which represents their leaders, their rulership, that they will be very angry and forceful and direct, and they're going to create a lot of world chaos, possibly even war, concerning money and their rights to the money probably that other countries, especially the United States, owe them. So this is going to be really, really come to the forefront, and there's going to be a lot of discord and possibly even war, because with their sun being involved in the Grand Cross, this represents their leadership, and their leaders are about to make a big stance. And in May, around May 19th, when Mars will station before it goes direct, it's going to be at 14 degrees Virgo. So you'll find that whatever's happening now will come to a culmination point next May, and there's going to be a lot of fireworks that go on concerning their decisions in China.
So very close by, China is another country that we all look to and tremble a lot about, and that's North Korea. What do you see for 2014 in North Korea?
Okay, North Korea. I have often said we need to pay attention to North Korea because in their chart, they have Mars conjunct K2. That combination is very volatile, very dangerous, and it is in the sign of Libra, where transiting Mars is going to station before it goes retrograde. And it's going to activate their Mars K2. This happens in February and March. And you're going to find that during March, when Mars stations, it's going to be probably the most turbulent. And then again, as Mars will go through Libra again, this will be after May into June, that you're going to find that they're going to come alive with violence, with more of their rhetoric about how they're going to create war and bombs. But I think they're going to really do something this time. I think we really need to pay attention to North Korea because their Mars K2 is strongly, strongly activated. And they also have Mercury at 15 degrees of Virgo, which will be activated once again by Mars when it stations before it goes direct, which is going to be May 19th, that Mars is going to station at 14 degrees directly on their Mercury. And their Mercury happens to rule the 8th house. And once again, the 8th house is the house that deals a lot with death, with endings, and enormous change. So you're going to find that between now and May, that they will be creating great discord, war, violence, and there will be death concerning this country.
That's fascinating, Joni. So as we move into finding out about Japan, I first want to mention that you did very accurately predict the horrible earthquake and resulting tsunami in March of 2011. You predicted that at least a month before it happened. Mm-hmm. And again, another astoundingly accurate prediction on your part. What do you see coming up in 2014 for Japan?
Okay. Well, I have a website in Japan, and I've been writing predictions for them for over 5 years. And it was a month before the earthquake that I absolutely said there would be an earthquake in March. And the way that I predicted it was just through Rahu and Ketu. It was when transiting Rahu and Ketu had come back to their starting positions where, let's see, it was Rahu that was on their Ketu in Scorpio and Ketu that was on their Rahu in Taurus, exactly at the time of the earthquake, and transiting Mars. Transiting Mars came and squared that, and that's what caused the earthquake, and it was in their 4th house. Once again, we can go by hindsight to see what caused an earthquake in previous charts to be able to predict them in future charts. The good news is I don't see an earthquake anytime soon coming for Japan, but I do see there will be some more trouble coming for Japan, a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, and possibly the economy will be under a lot of duress based on the fact that next November of 2014, Saturn is going to go into Scorpio. And looking at the Japanese birth chart, they have Mars, Venus, Mercury, and their ascendant and Ketu all in the sign of Scorpio. So when Saturn goes into Scorpio, they will have a lot of depression and stress and obstacles to overcome. But knowing the Japanese, they're always so brilliant and they find ways to overcompensate and to make things better. And that's what Saturn is about, making things better through hard work and discipline and diligence. So that's where I see the Japanese going. But for the most part, when transiting Saturn does go into Scorpio, let's see, Jupiter will be in Cancer. And at that point, Jupiter will be protecting with a trine. So even though I see a lot of obstacles, as a matter of fact, it will be brief. But then I see them making a comeback, as they're very well known to do. So Japan really has had a lot of stress based on the fact that Saturn has been on their Sun and their Jupiter, and because they have the Sun and Jupiter in Libra, and Saturn has been there, and so has Rahu. So things will get better, but they'll rebuild. That's basically what I'm seeing for Japan, and they always do make a comeback. So no, I don't see Japan having any more serious earthquakes or anything that they've had in the past. I see them making a slow, steady comeback from the worst.
So heading south of the equator, let's take a look at Brazil and see what they have coming up.
Okay. Well, Brazil has been in the news, and there has been a lot of talk that Brazil has gotten a lot more violent. And looking at their chart, this is absolutely so, because their Mars, their natal Mars is in Libra. And of course, in the past year, we've had the Saturn Rahu crossing over their Mars. Now, this is in their 9th house. So the 9th house predominantly deals with legalities and government and rulings. So I believe a lot of things have really changed in Brazil, and I believe it's going to get better. And concerning this grand mutable cross, for Brazil, they don't have that much to worry about. They just have an opposition, which is quite difficult, between their Saturn and their Mars. So for Brazil, you're going to find that approximately around May, June, a little bit of July, there's going to be some upheavals. But most of all, I think the worst is over with. After those 3 months, you'll find there'll be some changes in Brazil that are very productive and very helpful for future economy and growth in the country of Brazil.
And now, Joni, one of my absolute favorite places to travel to. Tell me and all of us what's going to be going on in Europe in 2014.
Okay, well, with that, first let's start with England, because England, they need to be very, very careful. And I think that their government is struggling somewhat, because when I look at this grand mutable cross, their planets are definitely activated, particularly their natal moon. Their natal moon is in 18 degrees of Pisces, which is exactly tied up with this cross that happens April 21st through the 22nd. It happens where all the planets will form the cross at 19 degrees of mutable signs. So Uranus will be right on their moon. And so this represents sudden, unexpected changes around this time in April, towards the end of April, the 21st through the 22nd. Now, their moon being in the 12th house could represent secret enemies, and that they're going to have problems with attacks from secret enemies in dark places. This is 12th house energy. So like before, years ago, they had attacks in their subways. This is a place that I would recommend to stay clear of as much as possible, because this would be the likely place where there could be the trouble and attacks. And yes, I think there are going to be some attacks in Europe. So the next country that I pulled up to analyze is France. France has their sun exactly involved in this Grand Cross. The sun being 19 degrees of Virgo, exactly where Mars will conjunct. So there is going to be attacks, but it will be more open enemies, because in the chart I'm using for France, the sun is in the 7th house, which represents opponents, open enemies. So there will be attacks, there will be problems. And the sun being leadership in the government, it represents their leader, that he will come under attack during this time. And also their moon is in Gemini. So this is very personal for France. There's going to be some major events that affect their country in a very serious way, and the government will have to make some major changes. Germany. Germany, of course, when I think of Germany, I always think about the euro, because that's where the banks are set up. So looking at this, there's some major concerns concerning the financial situation for the euro based on Germany's chart, because Germany's chart has the sun at 15 degrees of Virgo, exactly where Mars is going to conjoin with this grand mutable cross right now as we speak. Mars is in their 3rd house, so travel, be wary of travel through Germany. Plus, the sun rules their 2nd house of the economy, banks, and money. And with Mars there, it's under duress and stress and pressure. Do I think that the euro will continue? Looking at this, I think barely. But yes, it's going to have major problems, reorganization. It's going to continue, but it's very, it's got its major problems, so it's got trouble, but I think it's going to continue because they do have their ascendant K2 and Jupiter in the sign of Cancer, where transiting Jupiter will go this summer. So that will be activated, but I'm going to make a broad range prediction for the world, but I do foresee that when Jupiter goes into Cancer in July, that it will go into a position where transiting Saturn is aspecting Jupiter by its 10th aspect. So Saturn being in Libra and Jupiter being in Cancer, Saturn is aspecting transiting Jupiter. When this happens, this means that Jupiter cannot produce the goodness or the wealth or prosperity in the world. So my prediction is, until Saturn changes signs, which will be in November, we're going to have a very serious economic crunch worldwide between June and November. And when Saturn goes into Scorpio, it releases the energy of its aspect to Jupiter, and Jupiter can make prosperity come alive again. That's why the economy hasn't crashed during this time, because Jupiter is not being aspected by Saturn. So I thought all this was brought to my attention looking at the chart for Germany based on the euro and the economy, because that's a very serious part of worldwide economy. So my prediction is that the euro will be almost to the point of annihilation, but it will survive, barely. And so that brings us to Greece. Greece, where the economy has been in so much turmoil and trouble over the last year. And of course, they have Saturn in Virgo, Saturn 12 degrees Virgo, and the ascendant for the chart I'm using for Greece is 15 degrees Virgo, where Mars is right now. So you see serious things are happening right now and right at the onset of this year, January of 2014. Their sun is 17 degrees of Gemini in Ardra, which will be tied up in this mutable Grand Cross, which I find so interesting that almost all of the countries in the world are tied up in this very important Grand Cross that I keep reiterating throughout all of my speeches. So this is a very serious year for the world economy and for world war. And you know, they say that sometimes when there's war, it improves the economy. So my broad range prediction is this is going to be a year of chaos, war, and economic crunch, but it will go up and down. It will go up and down.
That's some really big news that we need to pay attention to with the economy and with the euro. What else is going on? Or I understand from you that eclipses are going to factor in also into 2014?
Yes, and eclipses are one of the major predictive tools that we use as astrologers. And one of the things that I always look at before the start of the year is to look at the solar eclipses. And the most important part of looking at an eclipse is to find where the eclipse lines are across the globe during the year. So what that entails are we're looking at the time of a solar eclipse, wherever it is most visible on Earth is going to be the place that is the most affected by these eclipses. And eclipses are always big changes and chaos sometimes. They're very, very unpredictable. But for the most part, astrologers are in pretty big agreement that wherever the eclipse lines are, in other words, where it's the most visible on Earth, is going to be where there are earthquakes. So with that in mind, let me cover where the eclipse lines are. Remember that the solar eclipses, there's 2 a year, always 6 months apart. So the first solar eclipse that we have for the year of 2014 will be April 29th. And the eclipse lines that I'm looking at here will be right through Australia. So I'm really looking at the Indian Ocean, very close to Africa, the bottom tip of Africa, close to South Africa, goes up close to Madagascar, and then through up towards Malaysia and that area of the world, and then it covers almost all of Australia. So we can predict that there will be more turbulence weather-wise. This also predicts extremes with weather, extremes with earth changes, so volcanic eruptions as well as earthquakes, and also social unrest. So Australia hasn't been in the news, but with this, I'm going to say that their weather is going to be very, very extreme, as well as earthquakes and earth changes. So to look at the second eclipse of the year, the second eclipse will occur, this is the solar eclipse, October 23rd of 2014. And this one covers America. So this is critical for this being the year of earthquakes that will occur in the United States of America. Now this eclipse line starts from way northern part of the world, northern Russia, and swoops down to the bottom of Alaska. So Alaska will be involved in this area concerning earthquakes. And then it covers Canada and through the middle of the United States and Mexico. So it covers really the whole United States, I must say, from the west, not quite all the way to the eastern coast, but covers the whole United States and Mexico. So these will be places where we will have extremes of weather, volcanic eruptions, as well as earthquakes. And so that also brings me to talking about the United States of America. What is to be expected for the year of 2014? And in the United States chart that I use, we have Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and the Sun in the sign of Gemini. And Jupiter at 15 degrees of Gemini is activated during this grand mutable cross, as well as Saturn is in Virgo in the United States chart in the 10th house. Remember, the 10th house deals with government, ruling, leadership, and it deals with the dealings of the government. And so for natal Saturn to be activated in this grand cross concerning government and government affairs means that there's going to be a huge breakdown in this. Mars will conjunct Saturn, and Mars will conjunct Saturn pretty much through February and March. And as I had predicted before, this is around the time that there's this reorganization where they see if they can meet the deficit, which of course they can't. But there's going to be a very big economic breakdown at this time concerning the fact that Mars will be slowing down and it will cross over Saturn right before it goes retrograde. And Saturn in the United States chart just so happens to rule the second and the third house because the United States chart has a Sagittarius ascendant. So Saturn rules the second, meaning money, finances. Mars hits it, there's a big explosion. This I predict will happen in January, February, okay? Then we've got the Jupiter return. Jupiter will join over natal Jupiter in the 7th house. 7th house in a chart can represent open enemies, enemies that come at us. So this is no surprise that as the countries that will come to attack. So we have to be very cognizant that this is a year of major turmoil and events based on the fact that transiting Jupiter is in the nakshatra of Ardra between the dates that I previously pointed out. Ardra is going to be 16th of January through the 24th of April. And there will be the window of some type of tragic event that will awaken everyone in America to pull together and to be more aware. And the economy, well, things need to change. They will change. There's going to be a sudden drop, a sudden wake-up call. So the economy may because of war, because of attacks, because of fear, have major spikes up and down throughout this time between January and the summer. But remember, between the summer to November, while Jupiter's in Cancer, it just changes into Cancer around June 18th. Till Saturn goes into Scorpio, we're going to have a problem economically in the world, and it's going to be a crisis because of the fact that Saturn will be aspecting Jupiter by its 10th aspect. So with that, there's going to be a drop in the economic world class problems. But when Saturn goes into Scorpio, it will improve and start to improve, and things will get better. So I think this will be a healing of all of these economic problems, but I believe there has to be a major cleansing where finally we start over instead of trying to put Band-Aids on things that just simply cannot work. And so this is going to be the big transformation, and it will transform all of us to look at our lives and the world in a different way. And so I believe it's going to be a much better world in the future because of all of this. So that's my predictions for the United States and the world.
We have so much coming up, especially the first half of the year, that we all need to be really prepared for it.
Yes.
And by weathering the storm and making some really wise choices, it sounds like we'll be able to transcend. And by the end of the year, look back and understand hopefully some really important lessons and move forward from there.
Yes.
Thanks again so much, Joni. If you would like more information from Joni, more details about what's coming up for 2014, go to our website, getastrologicnow.com, getastrologicnow.com, and you'll find a wealth of information there that can help steer you through 2014. Thanks so much for joining us.